On a hot April evening in 1955, a young musician named Elvis Presley stepped onto a stage that would change the landscape of music forever. But before he dazzled audiences across the nation, he faced a unique challenge in Seymour, Texas, a challenge that required cunning, a bit of luck, and an unwavering belief in his talent. That night, Elvis was booked to perform twice in Wichita Falls and Seymour by the same company, Big State Distributors, but the setup was anything but smooth. Elvis and his band, the Blue Moon Boys, found themselves in a bind. After a show in Wichita Falls, they were supposed to rush to Seymour to perform again, but fate had other plans. Their car broke down on the desolate Texas highways, leaving them stranded with no phone to call for help. It was then that a group of local teenagers, out on a nighttime adventure, stumbled upon the stranded musicians. These teenagers, with their own curfews to worry about, decided to lend a hand. They brought Elvis and his band back to Seymour, ensuring the show must go on. This story of Elvis and the young heroes of Seymour is not just about music, it's about the power of kindness and the unpredictability of life. Elvis, who would soon become known as the King, was still just a nobody in the music industry back then. But Alta Hayes, a representative from Big State Distributors, saw potential in him. She took a risk by buying up his records and even bribed fans to create a buzz around his performances. It was an early sign of how Elvis would shake up the music world, taking risks and defying expectations. As Elvis made his way to Seymour, the situation became increasingly desperate. The crowd at the auditorium grew restless, expecting the big star they had been promised. But when Elvis finally arrived, drenched in sweat and wearing his oversized suit, it seemed like all hope was lost. One of the local musicians, Scotty Moore, stepped forward to explain the situation. Elvis, with his quick wit, jumped onto the stage and magic happened. Even without his band, Elvis captivated the audience with his first performance of That's All Right Mama. It was a moment that showcased his extraordinary talent and stage presence. The story of Elvis Presley's early days is filled with such moments of improvisation and resilience. It's a reminder that sometimes the most unexpected situations can lead to incredible opportunities. As Elvis's fame grew, so did the legends surrounding his early days, stories of bribery, last-minute rescues, and performances born out of necessity. These tales not only humanize the legendary artist but also highlight the vibrant, sometimes chaotic world of early rock and roll. Elvis's ability to connect with audiences, even in the most challenging circumstances, set the stage for his future successes. From that night in Seymour, it was clear that he was destined for greatness. But it all began with a car breakdown, some kind-hearted teenagers, and a young musician willing to take a chance. In the spring of 1955, Elvis Presley and his band were in the middle of a whirlwind tour, playing shows left and right. Things were getting crazy, and one night, Elvis found himself in a bit of a pickle. He had accidentally booked 2 shows at the same time in Wichita Falls. The MB Corral, a small venue in Wichita Falls, was supposed to host Elvis and his band, but there was a mix-up. TNT Records, their record company, had booked them there without checking if they were already committed to play somewhere else. Elvis and the boys, including Scotty and Bill, were in a rush. They had to quickly figure out what to do. They decided to go ahead with the show at the MB Corral, even though they hadn't planned on it. They sped to the venue, but their car ran out of gas just outside of town. In a funny twist, they had to hitch a ride to get there. When they finally arrived, they played for 40 minutes, much to the delight of the crowd that had gathered to see them. After the show, Elvis and the band left in a hurry, hopping into another car to get back to Wichita Falls. They left behind a crowd that was still eager for more music. The experience was chaotic, but also showed how much Elvis and his fans were willing to go through to see their favorite performer. Later that year, in April 1955, Elvis and the boys found themselves in Big Spring, Texas. They had just played a double booking the night before and were dead tired. They crashed at a local motel for a few hours before their show. Elvis, always on the lookout for a way to promote himself, visited a record shop in town. The shop was owned by Oscar Glickman, a man with a knack for spotting talent. Elvis had a pile of records from his recent sessions with Sun Records. He offered Glickman a deal: buy the records and he'd promote them. Glickman was initially hesitant, worried about taking on more unsellable records. But Elvis charmed him with his friendly demeanor, and eventually Glickman agreed to buy a box of records. Little did Glickman know these records would become valuable collector's items years later, worth hundreds of dollars each. After the record deal, Elvis headed to their next gig in Cisco, Texas. The band was feeling peckish after their long day, so they decided to grab lunch before the show. At the local cafe, they ran into Billy Garrett, the daughter of a wealthy oil man. Billy was a familiar face from a previous show, and the boys were excited to see her again. After lunch, the trio decided to catch a movie before their concert. The film was so bad that Elvis couldn't help but joke around and insert his own lines into the dialogue. The laughter from Scotty and Bill made the movie experience even more enjoyable, but not without drawing some curious glances from other patrons. Billy, trying to help Elvis, ended up punching him to quiet him down, a moment that only added to their camaraderie. Despite the movie mishap, Elvis and Billy decided to attend the show that night. TNT Records had booked the concert, but they forgot to invite an audience. When the boys arrived, only a handful of people were there. Billy's arrival with her family increased the crowd size, but it was still a far cry from a sold-out show. Elvis used the opportunity to warm up the crowd, engaging with them and even making a joke or two about the empty seats. Billy introduced her family to the band, and she promised to catch up with them at future shows. Her father even convinced her to see Elvis perform at a concert in Longview a few months later, where a larger crowd turned out to see the young star. These early experiences, though sometimes chaotic, helped shape Elvis's relationship with his fans. They showed his ability to connect with people, even in the most unexpected situations. As Elvis's fame grew, so did the legend of these early shows, where he played to near-empty halls but won over hearts with his charisma and talent. In the small town of Gladewater, Texas, something extraordinary happened in April 1955. This was not your typical day, especially at the local high school gym where a group of musicians gathered for a concert. Most nights the gym would host local bands, but this day was different. The Louisiana Hayride Show, usually held in Shreveport, decided to make an exception and come to Gladewater. People were excited but also a bit confused. After all, the hayride was a big deal, but not usually in Gladewater. The owner of the Blue Grill Cafe, a local eatery, was the first to notice the unusual visitors. Elvis Presley, Scotty Moore, and Bill Black walked in, looking tired but determined. They were not the kind of crowd you saw every day. Their clothes were a mix of country and something new, and Elvis had those distinctive sideburns that caught everyone's attention. The cafe owner, Mrs. Landers, was curious. She followed them inside and was greeted by the sight of Elvis talking to the cook, Clarence Cobb. The two men talked for a long time, and it was clear they shared a love for music. In a segregated South, this was unusual. Elvis, despite his youth, showed a maturity and respect that made an impression. That night they performed at the high school gym. The concert was small, with only about 150 people in attendance, but that didn't matter. Elvis's performance was electric. His music was raw and full of energy. It was as if he was unleashing all his feelings through his guitar and voice. People were captivated, and soon the gym was filled with a buzz of excitement. After the show, people talked. They whispered about the young man who had taken the stage and turned it into his own. How could someone so humble and polite create such a powerful performance? Elvis's southern manners and respectful demeanor made him stand out even more. He called everyone sir and ma'am, and it seemed to add to his charm. Back in Memphis, news of Elvis's performance spread quickly. A year later, he appeared on the big screen alongside Deborah Paget in a movie. It was hard to believe. Just a short while ago, he was playing small gigs in tiny towns, and now he was in Hollywood. People wondered how this happened. It was as if a light bulb had gone off, and suddenly, Elvis Presley was a name everyone wanted to know. Back in 1955, after another show in Gladewater, Elvis found himself in an interesting situation. Mr. Garrett, a local oilman, asked if he would sign autographs. Elvis said he did sign photos and sometimes other things, like a French cuff on a sleeve. The oilman laughed and asked if he'd sign a shirt. Elvis agreed, and the oilman watched as Elvis carefully signed his shirt. It was a small moment, but one that showed Elvis's willingness to connect with his fans, even in unexpected ways. Months passed, but Elvis's star continued to rise. In Gladewater, the JCs, a local group, organized ticket sales for the next Louisiana Hayride show. They were excited but also worried. The venue was small and they expected a big crowd. Just before the show, they had to ask everyone to turn in their tickets because the place was going to be packed. When Slim Whitman couldn't perform, the host announced Elvis Presley would take his place. The crowd was initially disappointed but quickly changed to excitement. Elvis's performance was magical. His music, once edgy and unpolished, now shone with a new brilliance. Girls swarmed around him, but the local police had to intervene, reminding him to keep things professional. That night in Gladewater marked a turning point. Elvis was no longer just a local musician, he was becoming a star. His ability to connect with people through music, combined with his unique style and respectful nature, set him apart. The Louisiana Hayride show, which had brought him to Gladewater, would soon become a platform for his national rise. In the years that followed, Elvis would become one of the most famous musicians in the world. But it all started in small towns like Gladewater, where a young man with a guitar and a dream captured the hearts of everyone who listened. His journey from an unknown performer to a global icon began with a simple concert in a high school gym, a moment that would change music history forever.